Today, we are so happy to have Dr. Christopher Fang here. And it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Fang. Dr. Fang serves as the worldwide Vice President, Medical Affairs of Johnson & Johnson. Dr. Fang was awarded Eisenhower Fellowship in 2011. Today, we are so happy to have Christopher Fang here, and please join me to welcome Christopher Fang.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning. I'm Christopher Fang. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I would first like to thank MIT Chief for inviting me to speak this morning. We heard 6 wonderful presentations from the business plan competition, and it's apparent to me that each one of them will have the opportunity to go on and make significant contribution to our society. I would like to focus my talk today about making a difference. That it is wonderful for all of us to be here, see this amazing gathering, 650 plus people, 113 business plan here, all the future entrepreneurs and innovators here. But what I'd like to start by sharing with you is a very powerful and inspirational story about a young man named Robert. Now, if you would excuse me, Robert. Just a sec, if I can pull up my computer. It's okay. No, I'm pulling up my own computer. Right, so I'm going to start by telling you an inspirational story about Robert. He was an energetic and hardworking young man who grew up in Pennsylvania. He went out to moving to New York working in his father's pharmacy. At the time Robert was growing up, the surgical infection rate was very high. More than 50% of people would die from surgery. Doctors would go into operating rooms without washing their hands. They would go from one room where they were operating on patients with pus to delivering baby to another room. They would take sawdust off the floor, use a surgical dressing. More than 50% of people will actually die from surgery. Imagine that. At the same time, there was another young man in Great Britain, England. His name is Joseph. Obviously, growing up in England, he came from a strong academic background. Joseph was the very first person who discovered that simply by washing your hands and sterilizing the instruments, you can decrease the infection rate and the death rate by more than 45%. So one day, Joseph traveled to US and he gave a lecture in Philadelphia about how simply by washing your hands and sterilizing your instruments, you can decrease the death rate by more than 45%. This young man, Robert, happened to be sitting in the audience. It turns out this young man was Robert Wood Johnson, the founder of Johnson & Johnson. And this surgeon, young surgeon at that time, Joseph Lister. Listerine was named after him. I'm sure many of you have used Listerine. Robert Wood Johnson immediately realized the opportunity and the power of evidence, the fact that simply by using sterile dressing, you can decrease the infection rate and the death rate by 45%. So he seized the opportunity and invented the most innovative medical technology at that time, which is a single-wrapped, sterilely wrapped surgical dressing. Therefore, he founded Johnson & Johnson in 1886, simply by paying attention, seizing the moment, knowing the fact that the power of clinical evidence, no different than you sitting in the audience right now. There were many other people who sat in the same audience who didn't realize that power of that evidence But he realized that. He seized the moment. Because of that, now 127 years later, now Johnson & Johnson is now the world's biggest healthcare company. If you look at the statistics, there are more than 100,000 people working for J&J worldwide, more than 275 operating companies in 175 countries. We operate in all three sectors in consumer, pharma, and medical devices, and over 127 years of outstanding history. The reason I'm telling you this is not because I'm giving you an advertisement about Johnson & Johnson. It's because the fact that I would like to share with you, Robert Wood Johnson could serve as a role model or inspiration to each one of you, all of you future entrepreneur, understanding the fact that you're looking for the next great invention, that you can hit out ballpark, you be the next Robert Wood Johnson, realizing the fact that he was sitting there just like you, simply by paying attention, realizing what makes the difference. In addition to that, he didn't stop there because there are plenty of you who has great ideas. So I don't know which one of the six companies or six plans that were presented yesterday will be successful in the future. It's legendary that Fred Smith, founder of FedEx, actually wrote up the business plan for FedEx in college that is not picking up. All right. Could you guys hear me better? Good. So it was legendary that Fred Smith, who wrote up his business plan in college about FedEx, and who actually got a D in college, that his professor told him that this would never work. How could you deliver anything overnight? But that didn't stop him. Now, as you know, FedEx is one of the greatest companies. Similarly, it seems so simple. Simply by putting something, a steroid dressing, single wrap, how difficult could that be? That became the most impactful invention at the time. But in addition to that, that wasn't enough for Robert Wood Johnson to continue to be successful. He had to have more in order to make his job and his company successful, which is the second point I'd like to share with you, is that in order to make sure that he continued to be successful after he founded the company, Robert Wood Johnson, the general, the son of the founder, came up with the cradle at that time. And this became really the essence why the company is successful. As you read the cradle, there are really 4 tenets. Number one, we believe our first responsibility is to our doctor, nurses, and patients. Realize the fact that as a healthcare care company, we put doctors, nurses, and patients first. Secondarily, we're also responsible for our employees. So put the people who matters most, our patients first, and then our employees as second. But third, we also talk about the fact that it's not the shareholder yet. We talk about the fact that we're also responsible to our communities we serve. We fundamentally believe that it's critical you give back to your community, that we give more than 1% of our revenue back to our every year. It's important that we understand that. And only lastly, we talk about that. Our final responsibility is to our stockholder. And it's very important, if you read this very carefully, he talks about the fact that we must make a sound profit. In no place you talk about that we must maximize our profit. Realizing the fact that there's always a trade-off when you're trying to maximize your profit versus what you're giving up. So from the very beginning, Robert Wood Johnson fundamentally believed the fact that we must make a profit in order to be sustainable, but we must not try to maximize our profit in our decision-making. It is because of this, we frequently, every day, talk about how we make decisions. We talk about the fact that we make cradle-based decisions. How do we make those difficult decisions when we have to recall a product? We have fundamental impact on our business. And it's because of this that we're able to be sustainable for 127 years. And it's also because of that, we're gonna be successful and now the biggest healthcare company. And when we talk about now how we make investments, we also think about this. Which J&J plays very broadly across all spectrums of investment. We used to have COSAT with the Corporate Office of Science and Technology. We also have JJDC, Johnson Johnson Development Corp., which is actually one of the oldest VC, and it's been operating for a long time. It does a lot of investment. And then lastly, we obviously does outright acquisition, including the latest acquisition of Synthes for $21 billion. All that used to be our old structure. We're now moving to a new structure, which we have formed 4 innovation centers geographically located around the world. We have one in London, one in California, the other one here in Cambridge, and lastly, one in Shanghai, all of which now serve the same purpose in the fact that we play in the entire spectrum of investment, anything from the very beginning, including $20,000, $50,000 investment to an academic institution, angel investing, to taking equity stake, just like any other VCs, to outright acquisition. So it is very important that even when we're making those decisions, we think about whether or not we're making cradle decisions, whether or not we're doing the right things. Now, in terms of talking about this, I'd like to make a slow transition to a personal life and share with you what I've gone through personally. About 15 years ago, I just finished with my residency. I decided that it was important in order to refocus myself and to really better understand my calling, I need to really take time off. So I decided to spend 1 week in Haiti. So I packed my bag. I brought only some change of clothes and also a copy of Maslow's books on management and a couple big boxes of J&J supply, and I went to Haiti. To this day, it was the happiest time of my life. It was amazing that when you live in a place without anything, no water, no electricity, no internet, no computer, how great your life could be. Every day I was there taking care of patients, and I realized that time that we really don't need very much to survive. And one thing I also realized is that we're all connected to each other because we're human beings. And because of the fact that I didn't have very much, it made me realize and refocus the fact that our basic needs are very little. And some of you are familiar with Maslow's triangle of survival, but I like to simplify that to 3 levels, basically survival, success, and transformation. So what I realized is that we really need very little to survive. I was living in these villages with no clean water, no electricity, no internet, no cell phone, no computer. Every day by 6 o'clock, we had to shut off our light or we have to go to bed. But meanwhile, it was the happiest time of my life because the fact that I was making a difference in people's lives. And it is not just fundamental to what we do, it's fundamental to business. So all of us want to be successful. All of us want to be transformational. So what I will ask you is that as you think about your innovation, as you think about being an entrepreneur, I ask you to also think about the fact that what are you doing that's transformational and making a difference in people's lives? Einstein once said, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So, what is most valuable in life sometimes cannot be counted or measured. So, as you think about your next business plan, you think about what to innovate, your big idea. What I also challenge you to think about is, are you doing things that truly counts? Are you really making a difference in people's life? Are you simply trying to maximize your profit, or are you really making a difference in people's life? That I would ask each one of you, because the fact that you've been given more, you have the opportunity to come here to study, that your journey to entrepreneurship, to innovation, you think about more than just the fact that you want to make a business, you want to maximize profit, you want to be successful, but think about the fact that how can you be transformational, and what are you doing? That's counting. Now, I've shared 2 stories with you. One about Robert Wood Johnson, one about myself. I would like to now move on to China. Now, the story of China is interesting. Thomas Friedman famously published this book called The World is Flat. His whole premise is that we're all at the leveling playing field, that it doesn't really matter where you live anymore. Yesterday at dinner, there was one young gentleman who came up to me. He may be in the audience today. He asked me about working here and working in China. And this is a question I get very frequently, when I speak at Harvard, MIT, different student organizations, that predominantly almost everyone tells me that they come here, they go to school. They would like to work in US for a few years before they go back. And that typically turns out to be a bit of a challenge for a lot of the students because of your visa status, because of a variety of reasons. But meanwhile, people continue to pursue that. I would garner to tell you that I would challenge the notion that that's what you must do to be successful. That's an old thinking. I would challenge you to start broadening your mind. Broadening your mind be more than even just US, more than just China. Wherever else you can go to get the right experience where you should be going. It may be Singapore, it may be Hong Kong, it may be Thailand, it may be Africa. You should go to places where it's going to maximize your experience rather than limiting yourself to, I'm going to go to school here, I'm going to get 2 years experience in US, and then I'll return to China. I'll tell you a little bit about Johnson & Johnson as an example. J&J was one of the very first company to enter China. In 1979, we signed an agreement and we formed Xi'an Johnson. And as you can see, 1985, beautiful plan. At that time, it was a big deal. I mean, nowadays, that's not. But 1985, first company, first multinational in China. I would say from 1993 to 2007, J&J was a #1 multinational pharmaceutical company consecutively. Would you garner to guess where J&J Jensen or Xi'an Jensen rank this past year? It is not even top 10 in this past year. And this is given the fact that we have had 29 years history there now, with more than $2 billion in revenue, 10 distributor center, R&D center, all these products we have. The point I'm trying to make here is the fact that as you look at this evolution of competition in emerging market, you can see that initially we go in because we dominate the market. We're the only one with the technology. We usually will dominate the market. Over time, it will transform to the point now, especially in China, you see that now many of the local companies actually dominate in a very, very fragmented field. And we're seeing the exact same thing happening in medical technology now. J&J is still #1 company, medical device company in China right now. But as you see, most recently, Medtronic acquired Conhui, Stryker acquires Trauson. The variety of new local companies that's coming to play. As you're looking to innovate, as you're looking for new opportunities, you need to understand the timing and the window, the fact that this is a window there that if you're looking for an opportunity that I predict that in 10 years' time, we'll go down the same path in medical technology as pharmaceuticals, that there will be a large number of local companies that will end up taking up the very fragmented field that no one will dominate. But at the same time, that means there's an opportunity for all the entrepreneurs here, all the innovators here. If you see an opportunity, if you see a good innovation, you seize the moment and move forward. And as you can see, Chinese companies actually going global now, and including Microport, who actually just purchased a part of Biomed and the joint business. So the trend is reversing, that the world is flat. And for each one of you who has big dreams about entrepreneurship, about innovation, the opportunity is here. And more importantly, you understand now what's the difference to innovate in China as compared to here. my good friend Inlan Tan, who published a book about a couple years ago called Innovation, basically talks about the fact how Chinese innovators are going to change the world. Fundamentally, the innovators in China are so different than innovators here. He talks about the ARs. He talks about the fact that most of them already have revenue. They change much more rapidly. They understand the customer requirement much better than the companies here. They're able to reproduce much faster than the companies here. They understand their rivals. Everyone is entrepreneurs in China. You know, they have much more rivals from every places, every avenues in China. They also understand the restriction they have with the governments and everyone else playing. They're much more nimble, and they know how to remix things. They may be able to take innovation from here and there and put them all together, make a hybrid company that basically is a innovation from everyone else, maybe none of which are disruptive, but that was good enough. And at the same time, they understand how to use what's available to them to make things successful. You know, it's a very quick overview of innovation, but the basic fundamental premise is the fact that innovation to be successful in China is fundamentally different there than in US. And many of you studying here, many of you may look up to many of the entrepreneurs and the founders here. I would say that depending on where you're gonna play, US or China, you need to understand the differences and also understand the fact that now the world is becoming flatter and you have much greater opportunities. It doesn't really matter where you are. And lastly, Henry Kissinger famously said that each success buys you an admission ticket to a more difficult problem. Now that you've been here, now most of you have and will be very soon finish your career and maybe even successfully on your way starting your new company, as we heard yesterday. What I would say is that that's just the beginning. And many companies come and die. And as Jack Ma famously said, that 99.5% of those companies die and you never hear about them at all. And you only hear about the one who survive. And we don't know which one will survive. Yesterday's business competition was great. We heard 6 great business proposals. I don't know which one will actually make it to the end, if any of them at all. But what I do know is that it's a very long road, that you must understand the market. You must understand that how you can be nimble. You must understand how to really adapt. And just like what it says in innovation, that you must know what you're doing. And to close, I would just say that, as I mentioned earlier, if you think about the story of Robert Wood Johnson, he knows how to seize the moment. Maybe today, through the last 2 days, you heard new ideas. Many of you may have ideas about innovations, about a new company, but many of you may sit on that idea. The people who are successful is the one who sees the moment, who actually do something about it. Jack Ma also said that the only reason he's successful is because the fact that he was always focusing on doing, right? He'll focusing on executing. So over the last 2 days, you may have a good idea. You may have thoughts about starting a company. I would encourage you to, number one, seize the moment. And number two, think about the fact that how are you going to do things, not just successful, but that's going to be transformational. That's going to change people's lives. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. Yes.
I ask you a question? So you mentioned like Johnson will support startup companies. So how about like if I have something, have the product very similar as Johnson? So is that a potential competitors?
Yeah. Sure. That's a great question. I was going to cover that. So many of you may be interested in collaborating with J&J. It depends on what stage you are. I would say one of the most important things, understanding the strategic fit. And it's not only for J&J, it's for any big company you're looking to collaborate. And it's not easy for you to know that because we would never openly share that with you. But you could very quickly understand that by a simple conversation. If your product is not a strategic fit for us right now, it doesn't really matter how good your company and how great your idea is. You're wasting your time. So I would encourage you as an entrepreneur to understand that maybe we're not the right company, but there's other company that may be a better fit for you. And what do I mean by strategic fit? It could be a variety of reasons. It may be a white space that we don't currently play in right now, we would like to enter. That's a possibility, but you need to know that we're thinking about entering that white space. We would never outright tell you that, but you would know that by the level of interest we have when we speak to you. That's number one. Number two, it could be a complement to existing technology that is something we already have, but there's a gap between what we have right now to the market leader. So we would like to leapfrog or become the market leader, and your technology does that. And that's very important to us. So fundamentally, I think it's important for you to understand that whether or not it's something that's strategic fit. That's the first thing. Second thing is depends on what stage you are, right? Are you early? Are you mid? Are you sort of, do you have a company with revenue that you're looking for acquisition? And so if it's early stage, then obviously you're looking for the right type of investment. Mid stage is more like VC. We would obviously putting equity just like any other VC. We operate exactly like them. We sit on their board. We're putting, we get, and then there's a firewall, actually, very interesting. Whatever investment we make from JJDC, there's a firewall to the business. So in the case, if the business wants to acquire that company, there's actually a conflict between the person from J&J who sits on the board versus the person who's doing due diligence, and we're prohibited from talking to each other because there's a conflict of interest. So it actually truly operates like a real VC, and it does make a lot of investment every year. But what is also important is that if you think about any other VC, right, they at most make, I think, 10 to 15 investment per year. Again, it needs to be a strategic focus area, so we couldn't possibly play in every single area. I just use my own company as an example, Spine, for instance. If they're not looking to make an investment in that particular area, it doesn't matter if you have the best technology, you come to us, that's not gonna happen. And so you're really wasting your time. And so I would say, move on, right? I don't know how many times I have people who come and approach me and tell me that I have an amazing technology, your company should for either buy my company or you think about investing in my company. But it turns out it may be very well be true that they have an amazing technology. It's just not a strategic fit. All right? Okay. Yes.
Chris, thank you very much. A wonderful talk, and I always surprised by your talk. I'm more interested from a Wall Street perspective in looking at the J&J. One thing I know is that Warren Buffett very interested in the company, so put a lot of money holding stocks there. If you look into the the record of the Merrill Lynch, the fundamental economic research department, they put up a book that talk about the company. They invest about 10.5% of the annual sales to the R&D in general. I wonder, is that kind of trending shift, compared to a decade ago versus right now?
Okay, if I hear you correctly, you would like to know our R&D investment over time, where we're going. Okay. So great question. So I would say it's not a simple question. It depends on what you're asking. But what I could tell you is that, for instance, in pharmaceuticals, like large companies are no longer effective in their internal R&D, their ability to come up with small molecules, especially early stage. And so Paul Stoffels, who's our Chief Scientific Officer, who's responsible for all of our R&D, and who's also responsible for all the innovation centers, all the investments, all the VC investments, that he fundamentally now believes in the fact that our job, many of our job, is to understand what's going on outside and making the right investment outside. A big part of our job, at least for early stage technology, and making sure that we don't miss the boat. And that is why we have groups like COSAT, JJDC. We make sure we put strategic stake in many new technology, that anything that could potentially disrupt us and take our entire business away, that doesn't happen, right? So that's number one. So then the short answer is that, does it decrease internal investment? It depends on how you classify that. I think internal organic R&D will probably not continue to grow, but we really look more and more from outside to fill our pipeline.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other question? Okay.
I just have one question for you. That is,
Can you?
Yeah, I wonder if there is any experience you have that is to create a demand for a particular product, where the product is not so appealing at the first moment. Say you are a first mover into a market, you don't have a lot of competitors, but you don't know how the public will embrace your product. So is there such experience?
So do you have an example in mind? I mean.
Right. I mean, say, of course, it's not like a technology-intense product. So, for example, if you want to sell a shampoo and you say the shampoo has a particular function, then but people haven't heard about it. So what do you do to create the demand?
So it's a great question. So I think the conventional wisdom has always been that it's exceedingly difficult to create a market. It's not impossible, number one. And number two, I think what I would like to share with you is that we look at a lot of companies every year. I mean, I look at hundreds of companies, right? So what happened is that very, very frequently, we'll see an entrepreneur and a founder of the company who really think that they have something unique. But in reality, let's just take that, for example. You create a baby shampoo with a special formula that does something magical that, the baby never cry. Well, the chances are we actually heard 5 other people who presented the same thing to us. You just don't know that. And they're also a startup. And you as a startup don't have that market intelligence. We do. So you think it's unique, but it's not unique to us. And that actually happens majority of the time. So that one other thing I will share with you is that there are very, very few ideas that's completely novel and unique that hasn't been thought of by someone else around the world. But majority of entrepreneurs walks in there thinking that their idea is completely novel to big companies. And what you don't know, which we will never share with you, we probably just met with 3 other companies with some idea that same day at that medical conference. And you just don't know that. And we will never tell you that. And most big companies actually truly use new business development as a very important part of the business strategy, in the sense that we will literally meet with every single small companies out there. As long as you're legit, you do have something, that we will meet with you if you request a meeting. So also, don't get overly excited just because you have a meeting. It's simply just a meeting. It was the first meeting. Just give you an idea. Any acquisition that's bigger than, say, $100 million will probably take 1 year to do, and will be more in the meeting than you can imagine. So that first meeting is almost like your first date. You're going out a date with someone, a girl or boy, like for the first time. It's no more than that. And really you should understand it's just that. And getting back to your question, that I think it's exceedingly difficult. And if we were truly serious, we would certainly go out and do significant primary market research, which we will do. We will spend a lot of money doing that if we're serious with that, whichever particular company, and do a lot of focus group, primary market research, truly understand the market. It's easier in the US than in China. Part of our challenges in China, besides strategic fit, one of the most difficult problems we've had in China in terms of trying to make acquisition is the fact that simply the financials are just not there. It's not just the company, because frequently they're private company. We don't have the right financial to understand and to build the business model. What's worse is that we don't have the market data. In US, we have very good market data. Say if we want to go into, maybe more so in shampoo, but if we want to go into a specialized medical devices. We may have them for 5 major cities, but that's it, and probably for just 3 years. Typically, we'll build a 10-year market forecast for any company we're interested in acquiring, and we build a lot of sensitivity model looking at any possible combination of revenue versus economic growth versus GDP. I mean, there would be hundreds of pages of financial model before we make a decision. So at the end of the day, what's important is that as we make these decisions, it's always, I mean, in addition to strategically fit, and that's sort of the first step, in order to really make it to the end, the number has to be right? In terms of return the investment, the growth rate, and things like that. So the number has to be right. I don't know, does that answer your question? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Okay, hi. Last question. Okay, I'm lucky to have the last question. So my name is Zen. I teach healthcare ventures here at MIT, but mainly I'm a healthcare entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I'm just learning about China, but I was in Beijing with Deyao Zhao, who heads R&D for China,
Yes.
For J&J, and he was telling me about how they've really retooled in such an impressive way, both in Shanghai and Beijing, the clinical trials infrastructure
Right.
for world-class research at J&J.
Right.
Just beautiful. And part of that, he said, was that that you guys have strategically located your labs partly in the Chinese Medical Academy to
Right.
really partner with the government and to do capacity building. And I thought that was so smart, politically as well as just good for China. But maybe you could expound on some of that.
Well, thank you. Dayo's a good friend, and I think it's really resonate to the fact that part of the reason why we also restructure JJDC, COSAT, another organization. Now, what we recognize the fact that in order to be successful, we must build a long-term relationship, and especially in places like China, that will take time, and geographic proximity is key. So that's why we dismantle our existing organization where everybody sits in New Jersey to the fact that we wanted to be close to the hubs of innovation. And that's why we have an innovation center now in London, innovation center now in Bay Area, innovation center now in here, Cambridge. It's the very first time J&J actually have a physical presence in Cambridge, and then there will be one in Shanghai as well for innovation center. The idea is the fact that we need to be close to where the action is. And these are innovation, these are not R&D center, they're innovation center. They're center that actually makes financial investment stakes at early stage innovation, including academic institution to startups, and obviously to the end, we do outright acquisition as well too for companies that's mature enough. And so, for our other important key functions such as clinical trial, we also have R&D. We have R&D center in Suzhou for medical technology. We have R&D center in Shanghai for pharma as well too, that we try to be close to where the action is, because that's how innovation happens, because you just can't predict. Innovation is not one in which you say, we're going to sit here today, in the next hour, we're going to come up with the best idea on the medical technology. That doesn't happen like that. As you know, ideas sometimes come randomly, so you need to be there when it happens, and proximity and geographic presence matters. So thank you very much. Thank you for being here.